Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's live stream expert panel discussion focused on the topic of the Digital HQ, how to effectively run your business in 2022. My name is Dez Blanchfield and I have the honor and pleasure of being your host and moderator for today's event. Over the next 60 minutes in conversation with my guest speakers today, I'll be guiding us through a great discussion around security, mobility, manageability, as well as diversity and inclusion, and how they are being impacted in today's constantly evolving world we live in and work in. And in particular, what organizations can do to address these issues as we make our way through the year that is 2022 and beyond. I'd like to firstly say a huge thank you to Intel vPro for sponsoring today's event. You'll be hearing more about the Intel vPro platform throughout today's discussion as we delve into each topic. In particular, where and how the Intel vPro platform and the 12th generation processor can help address these key challenges around today's panel themes and more. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. We do, of course, want today's discussion to be an interactive experience for you. So please do ensure you join the conversation through the chat feature throughout the hour. You can also join the conversation on social media platforms via the Intel vPro hashtag. That's #Intel vPro via Twitter, Facebook Business, and or LinkedIn. We do have a Q&A section at the end where we will, of course, do our best to answer anything that we don't get through in the hour or in the live chat. Rest assured, if there's anything we don't get to, or if we run out of time, we will do our best to respond in the chat after the live stream or follow up separately. So please post your questions knowing that we will continue the conversation with you beyond this hour if we don't get to it in today's event. We do, in fact, also have members of the Intel vPro team with us here today to connect with you in the live stream chat. So pose your curly questions and feel free to engage with them while the event is running. And lastly, if for any reason you're unable to stay with us for the full hour now, please know that the event is recorded and will be here immediately after the live stream, ready for you to enjoy as a replay anytime on any device you wish. And of course, we'd love you to share it with your network of friends, family, and associates in your personal and professional spaces. One of the biggest issues facing organizations of all shapes and sizes, be it a single person in the gig economy or a sole operator or contractor, through to large enterprise and multinationals, state and federal government agencies, either for-profit or not-for-profit operators, is the need to be ready for what's next. Both being these challenges are ever present and they're increasingly challenging. The need to enable your entire team to connect, collaborate, and share seamlessly so that you're better equipped for today's and tomorrow's needs is more and more of a part of your organization's DNA and challenges. It's often what is making it possible for you to function. It's been what has kept your organization operational for the last 2 years as well, I'm sure. In boardrooms all around the world, we're asking ourselves what's changed and what's new. And we're having to find answers to immediate requirements such as finding devices which can support remote, mobile, or hybrid working environments, laptops, desktops, tablet computers, all engineered for a seamless transition to the next version of operating system and software that's always just around the corner. We are constantly seeking out solutions designed for faster collaboration for hybrid workers to be able to support devices in more places than ever before with modern cloud manageability. And we're faced with the constant need to support higher productivity, to be ready to pivot at a moment's notice, and to be able to scale faster, run leaner, and in essence, to help every employee deliver their full potential and capture more opportunities to propel your business forward. To do that, we need performance solutions capable of working within hybrid architectures, ready to fit within the way that people work today and tomorrow. And of course, those platforms and solutions need to remain cost-effective, accessible, and of course, secure. They need to be able to future-proof your organization by confidently navigating cost, performance, manageability, and the endless security threats that are thrown at us. And of course, be able to be delivered with experienced partnerships and interoperate with today's increasingly complex and advanced technology needs from networks, systems, data, all the way through to people and process. Let me introduce the amazing guest that I have today on today's panel. I have the honor of being joined today by Jennifer Stirrup, who is the founder and chief executive officer of Relish. Jennifer, great to see you here. I wonder if we could just kick off with a very brief introduction to yourself and your role.
Hello there, Des. Thank you so much for having me along today. So my name is Jennifer Stirrup. I'm a best-selling Amazon author in organisational change, and related to that, I have a real passion for all things diversity and inclusion. It's so important for today's workplace that everybody is brought along that journey. At Data Relish, we offer services in trying to advise clients on how they can make the most of their teams through having inclusive environments. We also offer artificial intelligence and business intelligence services. The thing is, the data often tells so much of a great story about the business. And the thing is, if everybody wants to be data-driven these days, then they really need to have an inclusive culture in order to make the most of that.
Wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you for making time to join us. I'm also joined by Ian Moyse. Ian is the Chief Revenue Officer at OneUp Sales, and we focused on mobility and cloud computing today. Likewise, Ian, I'd love you to just give us a quick 60-second introduction to yourself and your role in your company.
Sure. Thank you, Des. I'm pleased to be here with all of you and familiar faces. So I've focused on cloud computing, part of the industry for the last 16 years or so, been in the IT sector much longer, been involved as a non-exec and advisor to many industry bodies on cloud. And I'm excited about the opportunity that we're all experiencing with cloud, that it's delivered through the pandemic and the new remote working world we've got, but also new challenges it introduces. So very looking forward to discussing some of those today with the panel. So
great to have you here with us. Also joining me today is Jane Frankland, who's the owner and Chief Executive Officer of New Start, and we'll be focusing in particular on cybersecurity and cyber resilience and a bunch of other topics. Jane, great to see you. Thanks for joining us. I wonder if you could give us also a short introduction yourself, your role in your company.
Yeah, thanks, Des. I'm so happy to be here. I'm an award-winning cybersecurity leader, a best-selling author, a keynote speaker, and a women's change agent. And I work with women and businesses who value them. And I'm solving the problem of making women in cybersecurity standard, not exception, through my SaaS platform, The Source. I've spent 24 years in cybersecurity. I've become one of its most celebrated female influencers, and I've been called a UNESCO trailblazing woman in tech. Came into tech in the late 90s after a career in art and design, and built a global hacking firm. And I've also worked for some executives, some of the world's best known executives, and contributed to major industry accreditation schemes and forums. So really excited to be here and to be having this conversation.
It's so great to have you with us today. Thanks again for making time. And my fourth guest today is Bill Mew, who is the founder and CEO of Crisis Team and is also an EMEA and UK associate for Alnion.com. Bill's going to be focusing on manageability and management, performance, and a range of other topics. Lastly, Bill, we'd love to get an introduction to yourself and your role. It's great to see you today.
Hi, guys. A real pleasure to be here with you all. I'm in the trouble business. Whether you see me as a troublemaker or a troubleshooter depends on your perspective. I'm one of the leading digital ethics campaigners in the world on TV, radio, also bringing cases in the courts against some of the companies that are abusing our data. For them, I'm very much a troublemaker, but I'm also a troubleshooter. So I have a crisis management business that actually deals with cyber incident response. So if you're unfortunate enough to be in that sort of position, I'm one of the companies that should be on your immediate speed dial. If you ever have a cyber incident, reach out.
I love it. The friend of the CEO and the enemy to the hackers. Well, let's jump straight into that. Thank you all for your time to join us today. Really great to learn a bit more about you there briefly, and I'm sure we'll learn more about you through the hour. Let's jump straight into our first topic, which is mobility. Over the last couple of decades, and indeed the last 2 years, technology and information systems have no doubt improved our lives and our station in general for so many of us. And one standout area of that was mobility and the ability to work remotely or work from home or in a hybrid mobile fashion. Be it on laptops or desktops at home, or mobile tablets while we're working out in the field, and also being able to work and live in ways and places previously not considered either a place of work or a place of education. And remote everything, as it were, became our new normal, including, of course, healthcare and, I guess, essentially what we'd refer to as modern society, which has now been empowered by mobility in many ways. Ian, I wonder if I can bring you in here on this first topic. You literally live and breathe mobility solutions, and in particular, those in the cloud, as it were, on a daily basis. Sure. How has all of this increased mobility been an enabling factor for you and your customers?
Yeah, so I think it's been an enabler, but it's also a challenge, right? Because for all of us in any business of any size, we now face a user community who expects, if not demands, access to everything from anywhere, reliable, fast, access to systems, and a lot of legacy systems obviously weren't designed to work in that way, certainly in certain sectors such as public sector. So there's some challenges, right? Because everyone now expects to access anything from anywhere, anytime, and on any device, as you described. But if you get that right, there's some real gains, right? There's productivity gains, obviously, because you're not tied to a physical office. You can be reacting to that customer, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, anytime from anywhere. So it does put pressures on the employee and the individual, of course, that how do you switch off? But you get productivity gains, you get increased collaboration because people are interacting from different places at different times. You're no longer having to be in the same location at the same time. You know, we have all these wonderful chat applications like Slack and Teams now proliferating through organizations of all sizes. Knowledge workers, you have greater access to them faster. You know, things can happen faster. Customer experience can be much enhanced and different. So we can all be more responsive. We can get a competitive edge if you embrace the technologies that enable this. And through that, there are benefits of cost and time savings. You know, I wouldn't ever position this all as being the reason to do this and adapt is to save money, but it can be a byproduct of this. And one I think a lot of people have missed, which has become more proliferant and prevalent as we've come out of COVID, and we've adapted, as you described, to that new remote working world, is employee attraction and retention, particularly millennials and Zs. How many now look for what is the work environment? What are the tools you provide me? How do you empower me to be a flexible worker? Because that's now in my DNA, that's now in my wish list, as opposed to previously assuming you probably have to be in a physical workplace. So I think the whole dynamic has changed. Technology enables this, as you described in your question, but there are a lot of challenges we still need to face and address to deliver this effectively.
Indeed, and you know, underpinning all of that, I think it's pretty clear that, you know, platform choice, particularly desktops and laptops, are driving a huge impact on all of this and empowering those people to do all of those things. Jane, mobility must factor broadly into what you and your business does. What are some of the upsides mobility brings to the workforce for your business and your customers' businesses?
Yeah, absolutely, Des. I mean, it so does. There are so many businesses. You know, for example, mobility enables my business to serve a global market 24/7 and build partnerships with ease. And our clients can access our platform at any time from any location using any device. And this brings us closer together as a community to crowdsource intelligence, to learn, evolve, co-create, and impact the world. And you know, when I consider my team, which is dispersed and they're working remotely from the UK, maybe in places like Africa and the Philippines and Australia, we can communicate, we can collaborate, we can access our work at speed from wherever we are and from any device. So if we want to work from the beach, we can do that. Or if we're on the road traveling, we can do that. It's not a problem. Business still happens. And the team can be in contact with each other and me constantly. They can get real-time feedback and insights. So mobile tech solutions, and in particular cloud technology, which Ian has just brought up, makes it so easy and so much safer. It also means that we can better streamline our business operations, which makes us more efficient, productive, and profitable. And it means we can easily access, control, store, retrieve, and secure our data, which again saves us so much time and money. And it means we can provide a better experience. So we can attract talent. And I know Ian's brought this up. I know we've had a conversation about it. Des, from anywhere in the world, which positively impacts our bottom line. And it also means, you know, that I work with women and businesses who value them, but it also means that we can get more women into the workforce, and with flexible workforce solutions remaining in it, and families can be positively impacted. And then the final thing that I really want to bring up is the environment, because this is really important to me and my business. And with around a quarter of global CO2 emissions coming from the transportation of goods and people, it means we can actually lower our carbon footprint. So we can reduce our use of paper and printing, and we can do our bit for climate change. So that's massively important. And if we all do our little bit, then it can really impact the world.
Indeed, and we'll be delving into those key points in a couple of other topics as well. Thank you for that. Bill, mobility and all it makes possible comes with a range of new challenges around managing both the devices and the support ecosystems they operate within. What, in your view, has been the biggest challenge for senior management to address around the mobility topic?
What I think we've seen is a lot of the benefits that my colleagues have described, but along with that come a number of threats. Certainly, this has been evident during the pandemic when we've seen a massive shift to the cloud, to remote access. Many companies planned to go in this direction anyway, but possibly had to accelerate their plans at an enormous rate and possibly weren't well prepared for this. What we find is that a lot of the cyber criminals are opportunists and they're out there and they're seeking any potential weakness. And if you're not careful, you can be on the receiving end of this. The problem that we have is that these guys are merciless. And no hospitals or schools or any sort of organizations are off the hit list. And unfortunately, if you guys have vulnerabilities, you're not safe. I think we're in a realistic situation where that has since been complicated by a worsening geopolitical situation where it's not just cyber criminals. There are potentially going to be attacks from state actors out there. And some of these state actors, and indeed the cyber criminals as well, are enormously well-resourced and they are outskilled and far more advanced than many of the defenders out there. And therefore, it's possibly an uneven battle. And therefore, organizations not only need to grasp the advantages that come with mobility and remote access, but they need to be aware of the threats.
Indeed. Jennifer, when we were developing the material for this, if I can bring you in here, something you said to me regarding mobility and remote work or education really struck a chord with me. You noted that there are subtle but critical issues that impact the whole challenge of inclusion and equality in particular, and both social and culturally. I wonder if you could touch on what this means and briefly why this is the case.
Well, business leaders really need to find a way of building bridges between their business teams and their IT teams. And that's not just a matter of trying to, have pizza lunches and get people together. Because the thing is, what everybody brings with us is our unconscious biases. Now, the human mind is a wonderful thing. We use heuristics all the time in order to make decisions. Now, the negative impact of that is sometimes people can have unconscious biases which will adversely impact people of different minorities and, say, for example, women in technology, which Jane has already touched on. Now, for business leaders, recognizing that these exist can actually mean that you can tackle them. You need to recognize them before you can see them. And then that means it can help you to value your team members more. So unconscious bias is something that we hear a lot about. There's another bias I'd like to talk about, which is the proximity bias. That really means that remote workers are seen less. And that means that their bosses can actually look less favorably on them, because you're more inclined to think favorably of people that you see more often. So what does that mean for the remote worker? Many businesses, unfortunately, fall really short of supporting their remote workers. It's really hard to have a level playing field for everybody if people have to switch off their cameras because their device can't handle doing a remote call without a camera as well, or perhaps the connection is poor. And the proximity bias, along with unconscious bias, means that people might more negatively view that individual with the camera off and the mute off, for example, than they might do than perhaps seeing the same thing happen to someone who's perhaps a closer background to them. So leaders can really level the playing field for diversity and inclusion initiatives by trying to make sure everybody has a good platform to operate from. Now, we have moved on from the knowledge worker to the learning worker. The worker who's figuring things out as they go along. It's not always a linear path, but in order to make advantage of that, what they need to do is have a good platform in order to work from. So just to be clear, diversity is where everybody's equally invited to the table. Now, the thing with inclusion really means that everyone is equally invited and able to speak. The thing is with diversity and inclusion is businesses can see that as an optional add-on rather than something that really is crucial to business success. And you often see hiring campaigns trying to be more diverse. But there's not a straight link between diversity and lifting the value or the profit of an organisation, because if you don't allow people from diverse backgrounds the same ability to speak and be heard as other people, then you're not really making the most of that opportunity for your business and for your team members to be able to feel impactful and fulfilled in their work. And we all know that happy employees perform better.
Indeed, I feel like we could do an entire show on that theme alone, and maybe we'll do it another day. Thank you all for some great insights around that whole mobility challenge. I wonder if we can now focus on the challenge of management. This is an ever-present issue that we're facing as devices are now at the edge of the network and not necessarily in corporate offices. We touched on a few of the related issues already, but I want to focus on the issues and challenges around endpoint and device management in today's increasingly hybrid world, and the underpinning need to deliver a return on investment, or ROI as it were, as we roll out new solutions to today's technology needs, and certainly the types of things that you highlighted there, each of you. Bill, I wonder if I could bring you initially here on this. Let's start with, the topic of manageability and management of devices. I know you do a lot of work in this space in your role at the crisis team. You certainly speak about it regularly in public forums, events, and indeed on TV and radio. In your view, what do organizations need to be thinking about as they develop strategies around endpoint and device management in this brave new hybrid world?
Well, one of the most important things in this particular arena is actually having the right corporate culture where we have adequate evaluation of data. We all value it properly. We all protect it properly. And we also have a proper risk awareness across the board. And that's everything from training people on phishing attacks to all sorts of different things. But you just need to recognize that the CIO, the CISO, and all of the IT and security teams, they've got their work cut out here. And it's a very unenviable position that they have. It's not just the threats from the attackers, which I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, there's a proliferation of point products and poorly integrated security solutions. And this means that your typical CIO or CISO has got an array of products to manage. And sometimes we're seeing that it's almost more of a headache seeing to manage and to integrate those solutions as it is actually to deal with the cyber threats. If you add to that users that are possibly making mistakes all the time, possibly also are somewhat naively clicking on the wrong links and presenting more and more problems, then these guys have their work cut out. What we need to do is actually have a much more manageable environment to actually slightly tilt the playing field in the favor of the people who are on the defense.
Indeed, and so many heady challenges to address in each of those key points you just raised. Jane, you've literally written a book on why a failure to attend and attract and retain women in cybersecurity is making us less safe. And in fact, I'm going to reread it again later this weekend. And you focus on three of the biggest topics facing business leaders right now, namely the digital disruption, risk mitigation, and the overarching challenge of skills shortage. These issues are closely connected and indeed critical to the future of every industry. Considering them and the global pandemic and the Great Resignation, can you tell us a little bit more about what's going on for CIOs and CISOs in particular, and how they and their teams can work smarter, not necessarily harder?
Yeah, it's funny because I wrote that book, well, I started writing that book almost 7 years ago. So it's really interesting thinking about what has changed and how I see CIOs and CISOs. They are, it's like Bill was saying a few minutes ago, they are having a really, really tough time right now. And according to the World Economic Forum, cybercrime is going to become the second most concerning risk for global commerce over the next decade. And that is really quite worrying. What I find particularly concerning is the fact that the cybersecurity industry is still short on talent, and the workforce needs to grow at least 65%. That's a massive amount, and in order to get a grip on this. And although it's been making huge progress over the recent years, what's happening now is that we've got a drain problem, and Forrester has recently reported on that. And what they've said is that 1 in 10 experienced cyber professionals will exit the industry in 2022. The Great Resignation is continuing, and it's coming to cyber. And the reason why it's hitting us is really on account of poor financial and advancement initiatives, stress and burnout, and workplace toxicity. So to address these challenges really requires fresh thinking. It requires building cultures of psychological safety. I know Bill touched on this a few minutes ago. And I like to call them high challenge and high support. So it's really making sure that your teams are getting those things in equal doses, so they're not reliant on you, so that they can work effectively, and when a crisis happens, actually perform. It means fostering active partnerships and collaborations between industries, academia, and governments. And it really requires leaders to stop exploiting their greatest assets, which is their people, and ensuring that they're getting the right balance between people, processes, and technology. And I believe, through all of the research that I've done, and you're going to expect me to say this, that women can enable this. And in security, this is the bit that I find really interesting. Countless studies have told us that women understand and manage risk differently to men. So if you're low on women, then you are less safe. Women are natural change agents and guardians, and they've got unique talents. And when women are included in business, they will create the safety, the prosperity, and the sustainability that we need. And we can see evidence of this in the Forrester wave, as the highest performing companies are the ones that have tied diversity, equity, and inclusion outcomes to their profits. So there's a real business reason for doing these things. And the other thing that is also important is women actually represent around half of the population. So they are an untapped source of talent. And as cyber is multidisciplinary by nature, because it includes things like tech, finance, risk, legal, compliance, communications, training, project management, and so on, and it requires on logic, problem solving, analysis, creativity, and communication, then there are plenty of women out there who are in jobs that it can appeal to. So it enables us to solve some of these problems and move forward by getting that foundation absolutely right, and then moving on from it.
Indeed. In a previous life, both on either side of the fence, one of the most amazingly sharp hackers I ever met never even needed to use a phone or a keyboard or a computer. She socially engineered a way into companies in ways that I had never even imagined possible. And to this very day, I'm still in awe of what her skills can be applied to. Jennifer, for so many people today who are required to work with technology, it can be both an enabler and a limiter, especially for those who are not necessarily as tech savvy as some of their peers. How do you think organizations should go about managing the issue of ensuring that they are supporting diversity and inclusion and equality across the whole workforce from this point of view?
I think business leaders need to recognise that diversity and inclusion is a crucial part of their business success. We can't just simply say that if we hire more diverse workforce, we're going to raise profit, because it doesn't really mean that everybody has been given a fair platform. And to really make a success of those initiatives, then business leaders need to really consider having an anywhere, everywhere, and everyone platform, something that suits everybody. Because people do bring their perceptions with them all the time. I've been in the IT industry for 25 years, and I had a young man explain to me recently what the cloud was. I should add, I was one of the first people to take the NHS to the cloud. But I just let him talk because it was just easier. And I think when we bring our perceptions to the table like that, it really means that sometimes you can inadvertently diminish people if you're not giving them a fair platform and a fair playing field for everybody. It seems to me that CIOs and CISOs have got a real part to play in being part of the inclusion journey. It's not just something for the HR department. It's not just an add-on. And it's a real enabler for innovation. And that's the way that I look at it. So something Jane's just touched on, the role of women particularly, in being part of offering those really innovative solutions to cybersecurity situations. Also, as more remote workers come on board, what we are seeing is there's a real need for faster and better collaboration for hybrid workers and for remote workers as well. And that really means you can make the most of the diverse workforce that organisations are hopefully trying hard to build. However, this requirement for faster and better collaboration really means we need a good playing field and a good platform for that to happen. And that empowers people. The research shows that happy and empowered workers stay longer in their roles, and they're also more productive as well. So I think if CISOs and CIOs are really serious about helping to implement diversity and inclusion agendas, they will think about the devices as enablers for people to be successful, offering a real performance hybrid architecture for the way that people are going to work today, and giving them options and helping to make that link between a more diverse workforce and the innovation and the profit as well related to that hopefully organisations are striving for in very challenging circumstances.
Indeed, and a couple of the key points you touched on there. I was in a boardroom conversation with an associate as the CEO of a global bank, and they were talking about the technology cost of their operation. And one of the things they left out was that human element and the inclusion and diversity. So we actually helped them build that into their fully burdened operational cost. And there were some surprising elements that they'd left out, which even they were quite shocked about. And you've touched on a number of those there. Thank you. Ian, if I can bring you back in here for a moment, just around this whole topic of management and manageability. In your world, the issue of management of endpoints and devices is no doubt blurred somewhat by the fact that much of what you do lives in a cloud environment, and in particular with a third-party provider. And access to those systems requires a device of some form. What device management challenges have you come across in your work where the central business systems are literally in the cloud, but you still have some of the traditional desktop and laptop style remote management challenges to face?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because having been in the cloud a long time, I've watched a lot of attitudes change, but a lot also stay the same. And with cloud, there's this perception. There's a couple of things, I guess, is firstly, you to access the cloud, wondrous stuff that it can do, and all this power and all this compute power you can get at low price compared to the old days. You've still got to have a device to access it, as you say, right? Whatever that device may be, without that device, it's not in the ether. You still, and yet the focus often of businesses is, well, we can go on cloud. And that means we can use dumber and cheaper equipment for the user. We can give the user this cheaper stuff and lower spec stuff. And often that's not the case, because what you're doing is you're hindering the employee, right? Particularly now in the remote worker. And with this remote working, there's a different challenge. And if we all take this back to basics, we've all, I'm sure, been in the situation where something hardware fails and you're in a normal environment where IT says, come and see us. And they then take your laptop off you and they give you a temporary one for the day with a few, I see all the nods, right? And that's the world that we've all come from. How does that now apply in this remote world? And how does it apply when you're now giving them a cheaper piece of kit, perceivably, because you don't need it because we're going to do cloud stuff, and a less manageable and a less secure device. And security has always been the biggest subject in the cloud, right? From my first days in the cloud, still today, the big one everyone's concerned about is security, the data, all that stuff. Not that I could spend an hour talking about that, as I'm sure you know. Well, when you think about that, and you said it, Des, it was interesting you picked up on the lady you mentioned of social engineering. If someone is going to target a cloud system, invariably, they're probably not going after the cloud system. If they're smart, they're going after the endpoint user and device, right? Because that's your weak entry point. And if you're going to treat those users now as simpler and dumber and give them something simple and go for reducing the power and the cost, and I know we'll come on to this because some of the stuff that the Intel vPro does is quite smart around this, but you're putting yourself at greater risk, right? It's not the cloud provider you want to worry about, it is your end user and how you empower them. Do they care about the device you've given them, right? Do they care and understand it? Have you empowered your IT people to be able to remotely secure and manage that device in that environment? Because it's more critical than ever, because right now I work remote, and all the cloud stuff that we're using now on this platform, we all take it for granted. particularly through COVID. It's been adopted at an incredible pace. You know, I hear statements of we've jumped 10 years forward in cloud adoption and this technology. But do you know what I'm scared of? Is if this physical device fails, I'm not sat here with a spare PC and a spare device. Do I go onto my wife's PC? And then what have I got to set up? And whilst it's in the cloud, we all have local plugins, right? From the CRM, I have a plugin that syncs stuff. It's not quite, there's always apps and extensions of the cloud that make your local device interact in a smarter way and keep some data locally, perhaps, which imposes security issues of what if the physical device is lost or stolen. So there's I think what happens is we've now changed the issue with remote working, that actually these physical devices are more important than they ever were before. You know, they're not throwaway, because I live on this. How quickly can I get another physical device and get it set up and be up and running? And I tell you now, it's not a hot swap. I'm not sat here where I could be up and running in 10 minutes. I could log into a cloud system in seconds, but I'm going to be clunky. I'm not going to be efficient. I'm not going to still have some of my local stuff applied, the drivers, my devices. It's going to be a painful experience for me as the user, which is your knowledge worker, your employee, your value to your business. So I don't think we should negate that it's about getting cheap devices any longer. I think we should reassess what's going on in the world and the reality and the importance of empowering that worker, that asset to your business, the employee. I think James saying is really important, and I think we're missing that.
Indeed, and a little bit later we'll delve into some of those endpoint management features and device management features that the Intel vPro platform comes with baked into its DNA and its capabilities, and a number of things you touched on there. I think one of the things that really struck me just then that you touched on was that, you know, if we underinvest in those devices that are now required either in homes or in mobile environments, or, you know, even just in hospitals with healthcare, we are in many ways underinvesting in our staff and making it harder for them to work because they don't have the right tools to do the right job, and whether it's running slower or they just have issues getting it functioning again if something goes wrong. I wonder if we can now pivot to the big overarching umbrella challenge of security. It touches on everything we've spoken so far, and I know Jane's talked about a couple of those. Each generation has faced their own challenges around the topic of security through the ages, but I think it's fair to say that right now, all living generations from boomers to Gen Z are faced with a very real and ever-present, increasingly challenging risk around security, and more specifically, cybersecurity. Jennifer, I wonder if I could just start with you here. I'm really keen to get a sense of how cybersecurity is impacting the way that organizations address their efforts to support diversity and inclusion in particular, while still needing to operate with increasingly hybrid and mobile workforces.
It's a really interesting question. I really think that one of the promises of diversity and inclusion is that it brings you better insights for your customers, because you're looking at them through different diverse lenses, and that can mean customer data. Now, there's not much that wakes me up at night, but one thing that has me bolt upright in bed is worried that somebody somewhere is walking off with customer data. And we talk about GDPR and these kind of concepts, but I really don't think many businesses actually understand what that is. One customer I had just deleted all of their data that was over 2 years old, thinking they were GDPR compliant, and that was how they interpreted GDPR. So when you're looking at customer data, you can look at it through different diverse lenses, because you can't always assume that your customer is some sort of square or rectangular shape that you understand really, really well. But to do that, businesses need to understand that one of the promises of diversity and inclusion does rest on customer data in some ways, because we're expecting people from diverse backgrounds to look at this data and have a really good understanding, or perhaps see insights that from in that data that were not clear otherwise. And that means we're expecting business users to become much more data savvy, as leaders expect more and more data driven and decisions about customers, also inspired by insights from people who are from diverse backgrounds. Now, all of those requirements become quite tangled up, because we're expecting people to be very data driven. We're expecting them to be empowered to bring their true selves to work. Now, that's a privilege that not everybody has, and it's ascribed to some people more than others. And the problem with these things put together is we put very high expectations on some people more than others. And that can be quite unfair if they don't have a particularly good platform to work with. If a business has compromised data or loses their data, or the data is on the dark web somewhere, then that is, I think, a really frightening thing, not just for the organisation, but for the customers as well. And we just have to look at the headlines. Every week, there's another data leak somewhere that impacts people. So that really means that the leadership have a data-driven impetus, and they expect this to bear fruit at some point. And that should lead to better decision-making, as well as insights for people from different backgrounds. However, you can prevent these initiatives from being successful if you're not giving people a good platform in the first place to analyse their data. Say, Ian mentioned earlier Microsoft Teams. It seems to me that Teams is becoming almost another operating system for Microsoft. They're jamming so many features in it. Now, the thing is, that's going to become increasingly resource hungry. And for that to work, you need a really good device in order to surface what the application is expecting to do with that device. So I really think that with remote workers in particular, they may not always receive the water cooler announcements, there's a virus or a threat going around, and they need a platform that protects them every bit as much as if they were in the office. And this is particularly crucial when users are working with business and customer data.
Indeed. You reminded me of a generational cultural moment I had recently where somebody didn't have access to a scanner to scan contract documents that they need. They actually got delivered to their house and had to physically sign. So they used their personal mobile to take photos of every page, emailed it to their personal email address, and then forwarded that to their work address, and then saved those attachments and then attached them to another email. And then summarily lost their phone somewhere at the beach. So somewhere out there are all these copies of highly confidential documents and contracts, numbers, facts, figures, names, on a phone sitting on the beach somewhere that may be discovered in 10 or 20 years, because culturally and generationally, this person of an older generation just didn't have access to the right tools and thought they were doing the right thing. And at the other end of the spectrum, we've got younger generations who sometimes get very frustrated with some of the older thinking and try to work around these things. And as you said, platforms now becoming, particularly instant messaging platforms, what they might have traditionally been, become an entire working environment and our new office, which I think there's a whole range of challenges around that. And I'm sure there'll be another book to be written on it. Bill, the crisis team works directly in a space that I'd love to get your input on, which is data protection and data governance. What are the top two challenges currently in this space, and how do you address them with your clients?
I think possibly we need to look at things on two sides. First of all, there is pre-incident all around protection and detection, but you need to realize that none of us are 100% safe, and therefore we also need to be crisis prepared. We also need to be ready to be effective in our incident response, because it could well happen to anyone. So on the first, the protection and detection, there is a multi-layered strategy that needs to be adopted. And there are terms that those in the industry will be familiar with, such as zero trust and a whole load of other different disciplines from cyber essentials. And you need to actually build a layered approach where you're adopting all of these. And this can include actually not ensuring that it's simply just the CISO's responsibility. Everyone needs to share in that responsibility. And that means training across the board on anti-phishing and all sorts of other different things. But also we need to actually focus on the basics, and quite often people overlook the need to patch and to ensure that we're responding very swiftly to new threats. And Ian touched on the folly of cheap devices. If these devices are either insecure or cannot be effectively, efficiently and quickly updated with the latest patches and the security updates, then actually it's a false economy. You're actually opening yourselves up to a massive risk exposure. On the second side, where we need to be prepared for a crisis response and need to be ready for how we deal with an incident, this isn't something that's going to come together at the last minute in a hurry. You need to rehearse it. And actually GDPR mandates a level of testing and assessing all your systems and processes. And this needs to include how you would respond in an incident. And we coach companies on how they do this, and we help them when things really go wrong. But one of the things is pre-incident, people perceive security and technology as largely something that's delegated to the IT department. Once you've got a problem, it's a business problem. And this includes people at all levels and hopefully a very diverse group that you're able to bring together to deal with these situations. If you're going to have rehearsals in advance and senior management don't take it seriously, if they possibly delegate junior representatives to represent them during these rehearsals, then again, this is folly, because it's a bit like a performance on stage. You need the very best performance possible to save your brand. And if during all of the rehearsals, the understudies have been the ones on stage, when it comes to the real thing, the real actors aren't going to know their lines. And therefore, you need to actually have a really serious risk awareness at the sort of C-level of the senior management, and they need to be willing to participate actively in these rehearsals and take it seriously. And the other thing is, when you're fighting a fire, obviously you need people to raise the alarm very quickly and possibly use a fire extinguisher to try and damp things down initially to prevent things going wrong. But at some point, you're going to need the fire brigade. You're going to need the experts. And do not delay in actually raising alarm and getting the serious skills in. And this is not just the technical skills. This is the legal skills. This is the reputation management skills. This is the sort of social media skills to counter the sort of threat from misinformation and hysteria. You need all of that. And actually, you need to have identified the right people who are going to come and help you long in advance. You don't want the last minute grasp to go and say the sort of Ghostbusters to think, who are you going to call? And desperately trying to find somebody at the last minute. You need to know in advance, you need to be rehearsed, and you need to be crisis ready.
Indeed. You remind me of an anecdote that I'll quickly share around a couple of points you touched there. In another bank scenario, I had an 18-month project where we were challenged to review the security environment and all of the infrastructure and from the the bottom end of town all the way to the boardroom at the top end of the building, as it were, in their mind. And what we noticed was there was a heavy leaning towards the senior executives getting the best devices, the best equipment, and so forth. And yet on the front desk, it was the cheapest, meanest laptop you could ever find. So what we ended up doing was we just walked in with a coffee, pretended we were waiting for a meeting, picked up the laptop in the reception desk while the person on the front desk was distracted, and walked out the front door. Turned out it would have been about a 15-minute process to break into that laptop and get whatever data and users and passwords details that we needed. And yet we couldn't repeat that with the CEO's laptop because it was in a protected space. It was the most expensive device you can get and every piece of software you needed on it. But what they forgot was that from the front desk to the CEO, essentially it's the same level of access and privilege to the network and to environments, maybe not the same email addresses. And I'm sure that, in hindsight, they would have loved to ensure they had the Intel vPro platform on every device across that for that very reason, because there's something as simple as picking up a laptop at the front desk could have given us access to the entire environment. Ian, let me bring you back in here around the topic of security. I mean, security in particular, cybersecurity, if you like, isn't assumed for all things cloud, be it compute, networks, or storage. What, in your experience, is keeping senior management up at night currently in this space, and why?
Well, I think a foundation, and the guys have talked about this, and Jen touched on this a little bit, but I've heard the phrase "data is the new gold," and what you've got to understand is what the attackers are trying to get to is not your systems. That's the thing I've always had with the cloud is what if they can get into your system? It's not the system they want to get to, guys. It's the data. The data is the value. They don't want to get a login to Salesforce or Google Docs, right? They can go to license that for virtually nothing, like we all can. That's not what they're after. They're after your personal data. That's the value, whether it be for ransomware or for using that for other nefarious purposes. So the challenge is, what do you do with your data? How has cloud changed our use of data? And there's a couple of things I think we need to think about. One is data sprawl. How many copies? And this is a big challenge. I think Jen was leading towards, but how many copies of data are out there, right? If you've got one copy securely in the cloud and you've locked down how you can access control that with two-factor authentication on devices and done all this stuff and training, you're in a pretty good environment. You're never going to be 100% secure, right? That's the reality we all have to live with. But that's not the reality we live in. Let me give an example. Google Docs. You roll Google Docs out, and the usage I see is great. So we can create a doc, and it's stored in the cloud in our environment with all the corporate policies around it. And you can have the sharing policies, so you can do that collaboration piece. But how many people have we seen then go download the document? They take their copy of it. Now they've got a local copy. Why have you done that? Is it habit? Is it old school behavior? Is it because, oh, well, if I'm then offline, I can work on it remotely offline? And, so you've got to think about the behaviors of the users. Technology is a wondrous thing. Cloud can do all this wondrous stuff, but the biggest risk is what happens to stuff that comes off it, to local physical devices, as we've been talking about, and to the user. And I hear some, and there's a balance here, and I'm sure someone else may touch on this, but I worked in the security sector, separate to cloud and overlapping cloud at different points. And the danger of security, people always say, oh, we want to be really as secure as we can be. And there's a trade-off, of course. The more you lock things down, the more you hinder the usability for your user and the system and the productivity. And I always said, you can be 100% secure, but you lock everything away in a safe and no one can access anything or do their jobs. So there's a balance. What I often heard in the cloud world is, well, we want to lock everything down so nothing can be pulled off, nothing can be totally locked. And what I described to them was, and I know we're not allowed to have our phones on a call, but for, get your mobile phone, guys. They'll take a picture of the screen, and there's a cheap piece of software on there, if not free, that will OCR scan it. And I've got I've got all the lists anyway, right? So where do you draw the line? So you've got to get the balance right of understanding, I think, with cloud, that the beauty of cloud is it makes it affordable to share, to collaborate, to store immense amounts of information cheaply. We haven't got that data storage issue we had years ago where storage was really expensive and it was all backed up on network. It's all taken for granted these days. But with taken for granted, with flexibility, we're all used to it on our home phones, and the environment between work and personal is blurred. How many people have got their own device with work applications on it mixed in with their own applications and don't quite see the borders any longer? We live in a different environment, so we've got to think about data management differently. We've got to educate users differently, and we've got to cope with a very different behavior pattern that happens every day. We all do it. All the people on this call, we all just blur into using technology because it makes it easy for us to do so. And I think that's the biggest challenge, is complacency, and that senior management is worried about it's too easy now. It's too easy to do this stuff. Therefore, it's too easy to get it wrong.
Indeed, in many ways, I think Jennifer touched on a few of those points just around the cultural challenges around the space. I mean, a couple of the examples you highlighted there reminded me of a few things where on a particular project, we simply used an office block right across the road and a very cheap, couple $1,000 telephoto lens, and just screen recorded, literally zoomed on someone's laptop through a window, and then, as you said, OCR'd off the screen. And it was so low tech, it was bizarre. I remember reading something recently about a team who literally just listened to radio frequencies and used the signal from the laptop to the screen to draw the pixels, and managed to reverse engineer that. You also reminded me of an anecdote where some hackers stole a database, and the DBA was like, "Well, it doesn't matter if they've got the data. They don't have a license for the version of database we needed." It then turned out it was available within hours on dark web websites on my SQL free open source database. They didn't need a very expensive database engine, and the DBA had no experience with that open source software. Completely misread the room as far as that's concerned, not realizing you don't need a great big enterprise RDBMS to restore the database. You just need something that reads SQL. Jane, I'm sure your brain's exploding with all of this. The digital hyper-connected world that we are now in, where we have ever increasingly dependency on technology, particularly the pandemic, I guess, has highlighted just how vulnerable businesses are as cyber criminals and state-sponsored attackers that have adapted to new ways to exploit businesses. Defense is complex and can be full of friction. What, in your view, must businesses do to protect themselves from the likes of data breaches and compliance failures? How can they ensure that they are effectively cyber resilient?
Yeah, well, businesses of all sizes, and I really want to stress that, because it's so important. They've got to improve their cyber literacy, their security posture, and their resilience. So one of the first things that they've got to do is really understand how much downtime business can withstand, and then develop a well-tested and repeatable response and recovery strategy. Bill mentioned it a few minutes ago. CIOs and CISOs need a clear strategy. They need buy-in from the stakeholders, particularly the executives. The fish rots from the top down, the head down, so it's massively important that they get it. They've got to know their assets. They've got to know how they're interconnected and interdependent, because they are. They've got to know which ones are mission critical so they can isolate them when malware enters the network or a breach occurs, because it is a matter of when, not if. They've got to know their supply chain and ensure that adequate engagement policies exist and are actually enforced, because they might exist, but they're not being enforced. They've got to apply good cyber hygiene practices so that things like system patching, protecting user privileges, backups, phishing detection, and of course using secure computers like the Intel vPro, which has baked-in security features that meet a minimum documented hardware and software standard and provides superior stability, manageability, and security capabilities. So things like that can really future-proof the business and are absolutely key. And then awareness training is also important, because over 95% of security breaches originate from user error. So the faster an employee can recognize the cyber attack, the faster it can be contained and the lower the impact. So, and what's really interesting about this, I think, is that researchers have actually found a direct correlation between the speed with which organizations find security breaches and those that provide solid cybersecurity training. And specifically, organizations who deliver effective cybersecurity training, what researchers found was that over half of their security breaches could be found in under 24 hours, compared to the others who didn't have sufficient training, and they found them in a third of the time. So that's important. It means having a cyber incident response playbook, a public relations plan, a well-trained incident response team who know exactly what immediate actions to take and what PR statements to make when an incident happens or they discover a breach. And it's also really likely that this is all going to happen. Of course, they've got to have, and I'm going to say it, they've got to have more women in the team, because women are naturally suspicious. They aren't highly attuned to changing patterns of behavior. And these are skills that are needed for correctly identifying hackers and protecting environments. So there are other benefits that come from having women in the team, but those ones are particularly important for security.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, the last point you just made there really struck me. I had an incident recently where we had exactly a scenario you just played out there, where a combination of generational and cultural gaps allowed things to take place in an organization where the security team were probably an older generation of gentlemen, with the greatest respect to them. And so their lens on the world, their view on the world was very specific to their life experience and their position and station in life. And so we brought in a red team of young, fun, greedy whippersnippers of equal guys and girls, throwing a completely different look at things than the traditional sort of CISO team and in-house security team were even able to comprehend. And some of the things that we found were so fundamentally basic, just normal everyday things that younger generations take for granted, that were just wide open. And it was an absolute eye-opener for them, that their myopic, limited view of a very generational and unisex view of the world, if you like, restricted their capacity to think outside the box and imagine what other scenarios could play out. And I couldn't agree more on all of those other points. Look, fantastic insights on all of those key things around mobility, the challenge of manageability and ROI, and obviously the big topic of security. I'd like us to now pivot to the Q&A section if we can, and thank you all for those amazing insights. It's been a fantastic conversation, and as you've all each said in various ways, we could probably talk all day about these things, and in your case, Jane, write another book about it. We've had a number of questions come through, which I'm going to do my best to I guess, consolidate into single points for each of you, because we could probably spend another whole hour on the Q&A. As I said, a lot of great questions come through the hour, but in the interest of time, I'm going to paraphrase them and group them as much as I can and post them to each of you. Ian, let me just start here. There's been a number of questions around the mobility topic we discussed earlier on. I'm going to paraphrase half a dozen into this. What's the biggest challenge you face around mobility when it comes to cloud solutions? I think if you can maybe just touch on a couple of the questions have looked at things like different access methods for mobile apps, different devices from phablets and tablets, and particularly laptops and desktops, and why this is an issue. Managing authentication in particular and access control and the user experience around that. Could you maybe just briefly summarize some of what you imagine the biggest challenges on mobility and that access control side of things and the security of those end devices and how we can potentially mitigate some of those?
Yeah, I mean, one fundamental one that underpins this that I've mentioned already is the BYOD, the bring your own device, that's become more proliferant. I see some nods. And that's a conscious decision businesses are making. Typically, it's with mobiles. I've used, for many companies now, had my own mobile device where they pay the bill, but you've got to take into control, well, what remote control, what access and manageability and security do you have to that device as the corporation, as the business, whether you're a large business or a small business. If data is going on to there, if they're having an application such as their CRM, most CRMs, for example, hold some core critical data to business, who your customers are, who your prospects are, details about them. And it's very easy for a user to typically install their own application, their own mobile application of that CRM, and log in without the business even knowing it's happened, right? There doesn't need to be an authentication. You've got to log in. It just supports it, makes it easy. And then down comes replicated data to that device of your key prospects, of your details. And that can go across many applications, right? So there's a thought there around, firstly, are you allowing bring your own device and applications to work in that way? Because that has implications around where data copies are and what access you have. So one is the access piece. Security and device resilience, I think, is the big one. I mentioned already, so not to go back over the same point. But with the world we now live in, it's not the remote worker, it is the word you used in the question, the mobile worker, which includes the home, which includes the coffee shop, which includes the shared working space or the meeting once a month with your team, whatever that may be. Is you need to think about the devices, and having come from the security world, where it was talked about on here, how easily you keep those devices secure and how easily you keep them up to date, resilient and working. Because for me as a user, my experience, my productivity, my value to the business is through often now this device, this PC device in front of me. Yes, you got your phone, but that's transient for a bit of checking on it. How many of us on this call do all our email on our phone? Right? How many of us do all our docs? Most of it is going to be in front of a proper keyboard and a screen. And these things support you, complement you on the move. And that's where I really like what I've read about the Intel vPro, because it really changes the game in the world I've come from in a couple of aspects. One is below the operating system security. Inherently, that's where the attacker gets you. It's not the easy stuff at the antivirus level. You've got to have that, but it's those clever attacks that come in underneath the operating system and stop the machine booting. And in this remote world, being able to deal with machines that are inherently got a bigger flaw where you can't do the easy stuff in the operating system and remote control. I don't want to be told to drive 150 miles to the office or ship the PC and we'll ship one out to you. And, I want to just know, can someone help me now? Can someone remotely take over and do stuff? And that has inherently become incredibly more difficult over the last few years pre-pandemic. Now with remote working, where the majority of, or a high percentage of people are remote a lot more than they've ever been before, the ability to do that, I was really impressed with. I think that's a real game changer.
Fantastic. Jennifer, let me bring you in here. There's half a dozen questions I'm going to paraphrase in the interest of time. I wonder if in a couple of minutes or less, if you could, we're coming up to the hour. I'm just mindful of time. There are a couple of questions around challenges with regard to supporting digital natives. There have been a few questions just around how to address the issue of, this is how we've always done things. I guess the key challenge around how organizations retain and attract talent. Where, in your view, if you could, just in a couple of minutes, where should CEOs be focusing as they aim to continue to support diversity, equality, and inclusion, or DEI, at a time when younger generations and new entrants to the workforce are the new digital natives, as it were? I guess they expect things just to work. They've got a very low tolerance for attitudes such as just this is how we've always done it. And why that in particular might lose companies access to the best talent, and why this is a very real business challenge and business issue.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think business leaders need to understand their employees a lot better in terms of what they're actually doing, and where their emphases actually lie. Because the thing is, there's been such huge changes in working patterns over the past few years, particularly because of the pandemic, which perhaps exacerbated the requirement for people to work from home more. The thing is, work is not where people go any longer. People used to go to work, but now work is what people do. And like Ian's just mentioned, that can be the coffee house, it can be the back garden and the shed, it can be absolutely anywhere. So business leaders need to think about business continuity for quite a diverse audience in terms of what the business users are actually going to do. Now, we know there's a move towards the learning worker who is producing content and who wants to collaborate more and needs to collaborate more in order to be successful. For digital natives, they do simply expect things just to work, very low tolerance for things not working. It's a bit like that wonderful quote by Arthur C. Clarke: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And if you can think about that as summarizing how the digital natives work, that will really help you to see what they expect from you, which is a platform that offers business continuity, things just work, and also very high performance. Things work, but they work well, not just swimming along. I remember one organisation I worked with, the team there left their laptops at home at night. And I thought, okay, maybe I'm just the workaholic that takes my laptop at home every night. And this was my own laptop. And I asked one of them about it, and they said, well, the laptops are so ropey that I use my home computer to do everything. And they were putting everything in a USB. And I said, well, why don't you use the cloud? And the business leader, no joke, he said, I don't believe it's secure. And then he said to me, can you help me find my USB? I think I've lost it somewhere. And all I saw was the top of his head as he's trying to, shuffle around papers on his desk for this USB. And you just can't be like that anymore. The cloud is not going anywhere. You need devices that work with the cloud. And what I particularly liked about the Intel vPro technology was its ability to go off, and if it was under a ransomware attack, to go and download the fix and implement that fix without the user knowing about it. And that's exactly the sufficiently advanced magic that digital natives are looking for.
Fantastic. Bill, on the manageability theme, there are a number of key points here that I'm going to try and paraphrase in the interest of time. We are coming up to the hour now. If in a couple of minutes you could just briefly consolidate your thoughts around these key points. There'll be a number of questions where people have asked, what is the number one thing you'd advise technology decision makers to place at the top of their lists of requirements for the likes of their next investments in endpoints and devices? I wonder if you could just summarize some of the advice you would give C-suite when they're thinking about their next investment, and I guess in particular how the Intel vPro platform might be able to play into that to help them address some of that.
In the interest of time, I'm going to be short and sweet and very direct. Our teams actually have a massive and ever-increasing workload. If we don't make it easier for them to overcome the complexity, they're not going to be able to keep us safe. And we have a proliferation of poorly integrated point solutions and services. We have geographically dispersed devices. If we can't help manage those effectively and easily, they're not even going to have time to address the real threats out there. The advantage that we have with Intel vPro, and that is a real game changer, is the manageability, the ability to input patches and to protect devices that are remote and possibly even not able to boot up, that can be done so remotely. If we don't have that sort of thing, if we don't have the sort of API integration that we have from the platform that this provides us with security built in, we're not going to be able to have the simplified management that the IT team, that the security team that need in order to keep us safe. And therefore, we're battling complexity as well as cyber threats. And we need the tools to be able to do that.
Fantastic. Jane, lucky last. I wonder if you can wrap us up. We are on the hour, but I don't want to rush you. There have been a lot of questions just around why cybersecurity has become such a critical issue. a lot of the questions, which again, I'm going to paraphrase, if you could maybe just in 2 minutes or less, consolidate your thoughts around what's causing the exponential increase in risks in this space for organizations, from schools and business through to healthcare. We've had lots of questions around that topic, but I wonder if we can just put it together of what do you think is driving the dramatic increase in the cybersecurity risks? And in particular, where you think some of the great features of the Intel vPro platform with their baked-in security features can help organizations address these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the problem is there because literally the world is run on digital, and almost every single aspect of our lives is controlled by tech. And the technologies that we rely on, as I mentioned earlier, they're interconnected, they're interdependent, and also some are old. So we are having to use operating systems, software and devices which are vulnerable and unsupported. So in the past, it was all about theft and it was all about reputational damage. And although they are still around, the risks have scaled because the attack surface has grown, and they're literally bringing businesses and sometimes even parts of countries to a halt. So say since the pandemic, millions of people from all over the world, they've literally been taken offline by hackers demanding a ransom because it's one of the most popular forms of attack. But it's not the only form of attack that's popular. Only last year, what we saw was this rise in supply chain attacks. They grew 300% in 2021. And this is where attackers actually focus their efforts on a vendor, software application provider, or even open source software. And when this happens, then attackers gain access to the vendor's customers, or they can modify the software code and that's sent to customers, or it's downloaded from a website. So this results in downtime, monetary loss, lawsuits, reputational damage, and it's not great. Now, we've seen examples of that with the SolarWinds, which hopefully people will be aware of, and also Kaseya, which cost billions. But for me, the biggest cause of or worry when it comes to cyber attacks is really through social engineering, specifically phishing, because it's just so effective. And this is where attacks come from posing as a trusted source, preying on human vulnerability, and using things like email and malicious websites to gain the information that they want. But targeted attacks, they're not the only problem. We have many breaches that come from accidental human error. I mentioned it earlier, 95%. So this could be things like missing certificates or not patching. And so that's why we've got to accept nowadays that everything is hackable. We've got to work from a position of zero trust. We've got to be prepared, and we've got to be more cyber resilient. So for me, I mentioned some of the really great things that I love about Intel. I'm an Intel user myself, so it's such a brilliant. The vPro is a brilliant platform. I don't want to mention what everyone else has mentioned, so I'm going to mention this. The Intel vPro platform is trusted. It is future-proofed. If we look at the CPU, then it's got fantastic validation. Everything has been tested over a long period of time. And the silicon on the motherboard, the network interface card, the graphics, and all the other hardware, all the other components that they're using are thoroughly tested to provide an overall more secure PC.
Indeed, and thank you very much for that. Well, we are just over the hour. Thank you very much, all four of you, for those amazing insights on each of our key theme topics there. And folks, thank you for the fantastic discussion over the hour. It's been amazing. We really appreciate everyone sticking with us through the hour. So amazing insights and information there. A lot of very powerful, actionable takeaways for our audience to now take away and put into play. With so much to discuss, we probably didn't quite get as much of a chance to go into the full detail of how the new Intel vPro platform and the 12th generation processors can deliver a complete platform portfolio with computing solutions for nearly every type of worker at every type of business size. So I thought I would leave you with this key point around a conversation that I had in a boardroom recently. I have this sort of conversation at least twice a week now with customers and associates, where I outline what I call legacy design patterns of a traditional enterprise stack in buildings and data centers versus the new design pattern where all that power needs to be in the devices we're using. For example, in the old design pattern, we would have computer rooms of data centers filled with racks populated with high-end enterprise routers and switches and firewalls and web filters and web application firewalls and intrusion detection and intrusion inspection denial of service and distributed denial of service protection, anti-Trojan, antivirus, anti-phishing, and VPN and termination service, where there's hardware and chips actually doing some of the encryption and decryption, usually connected to in a big tower block somewhere or in data centers. Whereas the new design pattern is personal home broadband internet and consumer grade routers and Wi-Fi access devices. And then the end device that we work on and all those other parts of the enterprise stack is now software and apps running on that laptop or desktop, and trying to protect us from those hackers and spyware, et cetera, which requires significantly higher powered devices. And we also need to be able to run our apps, such as email and word processing and spreadsheeting, et cetera, on the computer at the same time, and have it perform as well as it did when all that security infrastructure was done by hardware and enterprise environments, as it were. And I think this is the big shift we're seeing now with what the Intel vPro platform and the 12th generation process can make possible, that previously we may not have had the type of security baked in, the type of networking baked in, as we spoke about just a moment ago, and just the pure performance we need to make all this work in a hybrid and increasingly work from home remote working environment. So we're going to make sure that we have links and details where people can learn how and why the Intel vPro platform now addresses these very challenges. We'll leave a link in the show description below for you, so you can find out more and see how it can enable your entire team to connect, collaborate, and share seamlessly, making you better equipped for tomorrow's needs. In particular, how it can help you pivot and scale faster, and how every employee can deliver their full potential and capture more opportunities to propel your business forward. And of course, secure your organization's future and your data by confidently navigating security threats with experienced partnerships and advanced technology, future-proofing your workforce for current and new challenges as they endeavor to live and work in today's world. I really want to say a huge thank you to all of our attendees for joining us for the hour and sticking with us just over the hour. If you've joined us live, it's been great to have you here, and thanks for joining the conversation in the chat. If you've joined us via a replay, thank you very much, and please do share it with your friends and associates. Jennifer, Jane, Ian, Bill, thank you so much for your time. It's been great to spend time with you. We could literally, as you said earlier, talk all day on these platforms. Really, really appreciate the amazing, unique lens and insights you brought to this. And a huge thank you to our sponsor, Intel vPro, who have made today's event possible. I would like to leave you with this. I want to invite our attendees to continue the conversation on digital and social platforms via the Intel vPro hashtag on all social platforms. So that's #Intel vPro. Make sure you're following our amazing guests from today's show, and of course our sponsor Intel, just to keep up with the latest news and insights that you'll need, and join the conversation through the Intel vPro hashtag. But for now, folks, that's a wrap. We'll see you in the next one. Have a wonderful day. And Jennifer, Jane, Ian, Bill, thank you so much again for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm Dez Blanchfield, and with that, we'll wrap. Have a great day. Stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.